Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior AP English, and our objective now for the hour is to return to our comments regarding TS Eliot. And more particularly, now today, we're going to spend our time with the Hollowmen. It's difficult to say that we will spend our time with the Hollowmen, knowing that I only have an hour or less to be able to cover this really important single text. However, let's begin with biography for just a moment. Eliot begins to increasingly develop a poetic voice that is rooted in the mantra, "What went wrong?" Now, let's point out about that mantra, there's no questioning the absolute certainty something has gone wrong. Do you understand? In other words, it's not the question, has something gone wrong? Is our culture like something wrong with our culture? That's not this question. This question assumes almost like a two-part dance. And part one of the dance is an absolute certainty. Something is fundamentally screwed up with modern culture. And when I say modern culture for T.S. Eliot, I really mean European modern culture, okay? That's what we're really talking about, European American culture. Something is wrong. What is it that's wrong? Well, to address that project, Eliot will begin a series of poems, Hollowmen, the one we look at today. By 1922, in the Wasteland, he will have kind of explicated this to the nth degree, we might say. Where does he go to derive his views? Two places. One, he will spend quite a bit of time combing through a book called The Golden Bough by a guy named Fraser. I would suggest you write this title down, and if you're stumbling through used bookstores, as I hope that you will when you get to cities where there's used bookstores, if you see this volume, you want to purchase it. The Golden Bough by Fraser. Fraser was an anthropologist, an early anthropologist, who did a lot of comparative study analyses of mythic ceremonial rites. In Golden Bough, he pointed out, for example, that lots and lots of pre-modern primitive cultures, was that older non-PC language, primitive cultures would do really wacky things in the spring. I mean, you're familiar with what the Dionysian festival was all about, right? And in the spring, you did all of this sexual orgy stuff, and there's all kinds of stories of women going completely nuts and tearing apart their men and all that kind of stuff. That's part of the Greek Dionysian Bacchian tradition. But when you look elsewhere in the world, you see all kinds of strange things happening in the month of April. The first line of The Wasteland is, "April is the cruelest month." In the month of April, all kinds of interesting things happen. The child that's born in April is buried alive under the ground. Where, though? In the middle of the field that's about to be planted. Dude, what is up with that? Well, again, Fraser starts to point out that in almost all pre-modern primitive tribal societies, you have some version of what the Egyptians made famous: death, burial, and resurrection. For those of you who come, of course, out of Christian backgrounds, you will, as many of Fraser's readers, make the observation, oh yeah, that's kind of foundational to Christian theology as well. The very sacramental approach to a Sunday Mass has a lot to do with a death, a burial, and a resurrection. Those notions for Fraser go way, way back. If you will, there's kind of a two-part gig in regards to this. One is somebody's got to get jacked. It's like there must be bloodshed. To quote the biblical verse, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. And that is that's a very, very ancient, Fraser said, that's a very ancient idea. We are familiar with it in South and Central America. You've probably seen even bad movies about, people getting sacrificed at certain times of the year. Guess what? Most of that happened in the spring, but guess what? In what we would call the month of April. Two, yes, somebody's got to die, but the reason somebody has to die is so that others can live. In the ancient Hebraic tradition, this is our understanding of scapegoating and the like. In other words, there's this idea of rejuvenation. resurrection, renaissance, rebirth. So in other words, something really nasty has to happen, i.e. somebody gets seriously bunged. And by the way, the bunging can be really bad. So for example, Native American tribes would often fillet alive, right? Completely have ways to remove all of the skin, epidermis, of an individual and still keep that individual alive. They had remarkable ways of doing this so that the horrific pain involved and the screaming of the victim, of course, was celebrated as being, of course, part of, again, this process where we do this so that others can live, right? Now, for those of you who say, what a horrifically terrible idea, Fraser will say, have you been to church on Sunday morning recently? Because I can absolutely guarantee you, if you've been to church on Sunday morning, there's been some reference to the notion of the shedding of blood and the idea of sacrifice for the greater good. Fraser will point out, this is a very ancient motif, and it is a necessary one in social development. I mean, to go back to Plato's question about how do we all be friends and get along, kill one of us. That's the answer Fraser gives. You kill one of us, and that leads then to the ability for the rest of us to live peacefully and, hurrah, all of our crops to grow. See, there's this notion that there's this tie between burying somebody, usually alive, and then of course, everything grows. All the crops grow. Why? Because, of course, some god or goddess, of course, we think in the Greek tradition of Demeter, then is happy. And once Demeter is happy, because Persephone is now being allowed to exit from Hades for a few days, now everything starts to grow again. There is a tie then between their religion and their agriculture. And these agrarian cultures have very much this idea. Of course, let's point out that you can be gather herder tribes as well. And you can still do this thing of sacrificing something, whether it be a goat or it be a lamb or, of course, a human being, right? I mean, you have these kinds of stories replete in mythology. I mean, if you've picked up and read the Bible, you are familiar with at least the Judges 11 story of Jephthah's daughter. And of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, who gets right to the point of suicide or of sacrifice. And then, of course, his hand is stayed. But nonetheless, the storyline is there. The idea is you commit to the sword or to the fire. Lots of times it's fire, an individual, so that everybody else can be served in some way. And there's all kinds of really strange stories that Fraser tells about. Eliot's very interested in these stories. The Fisher King story is the second one, along with the King Arthur story. T.S. Eliot's very interested in King Arthur, because when he looks at the King Arthur story, he's like, well, you know, there's a lot of interesting parallels there. There's lots of things about water, and there's lots of things about strange women lying in ponds, and swords, and all that kind of stuff. And there seems to be this kind of ongoing dynamic between doing what you want to do versus doing what you need to do. You know, that back and forth and all of that. In other words, in a word, duty. Duty. Keeping your duty, doing the thing you're supposed to do whether you want to do it or not. The English have been raised with this idea, right? T.S. Eliot will point out, we are the Hollowmen. We are stuffed men. Let's read the poem, and then we'll exegete. Of course, you already know the opening line, the epigraph at the top, don't you? Mr. Kurt, he dead. For those of you who enjoyed, if not enjoyed, endured, reading Conrad's Heart of Darkness, you are, of course, aware that Kurtz is a fascinating character. A man, shall we say it, of vicious action, is he not? He is a man who represents his life through action. If you saw the film V for Vendetta, you're already aware of the Guy Fawkes project, and more particularly, A Penny for the Old Guy. Guy Fawkes, another man of vicious action, he wasn't really much into the whole notion of politics, so he decided he would solve all of England's problems by putting a whole bunch of dynamite right underneath Parliament when it was scheduled to meet. With a single kaboom, he was going to take care of every politician in all of England and therefore solve all of the problems of England by getting rid of all the politicians. Guy Fawkes, of course, almost succeeds. They discover his plot at the last second, and of course he dies, etc. But A Penny for the Old Guy is a way to celebrate the idea that there is a man willing to go to his death to take care of all of the money-grubby politicians, you see. Notice these are the two quotes that will begin the poem, The Hollowmen. Not lost, by the way, on readers of Eliot's day. Probably more lost on us today. All right, let's read the poem, and before we do so, please identify that there are 5 sections to this poem, and therefore I would recommend, you'll be memorizing only the first part of the first section. I recommend that you number 1 through 5, and then as we go through this poem and we exegete, you'll be able to identify the ways in which part 1 leads to part 2, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead now and look at the poem itself, and first a reading. The Hollowmen. We are the hollow men. We're the stuffed men. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. Eyes I dare not meet in dreams in death's dream kingdom, these do not appear. There, the eyes are sunlight on a broken column. There is a tree swinging, and voices are in the wind singing, more distant and more solemn than a fading star. Let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises, rat's coat, crow skin, cross staves in a field, behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer. Not that final meeting in the twilight kingdom. This is the dead land. This is cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hen under the twinkle of a fading star. Is it like this in death's other kingdom, waking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone? The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. In this last of meeting places, we grope together and avoid speech, gathered on the beach of the tumid river, sightless unless the eyes reappear as the perpetual star, multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men. Here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is, life is. For thine is the. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. To make a 3A observation quickly again, I think I've said this already once to you. Apocalypse Now is Francis Ford Coppola's offering of a rewrite of Heart of Darkness. When you see the Marlon Brando character who is playing Colonel Kurtz at the end of the movie, and he comes onto the stage for the first time into the screen, and it's, of course, done hauntingly, brilliantly well. He has a book in his hand, and he will read from that book the lines from The Hollowmen. I am not exaggerating when I say that this poem becomes, in the 20th century, the prophetic poem of all poems. And yet I've had seniors that will say to me, dude, after you finished reading this poem, you might as well have stood up there and gone, it means about that much to me. So let's exegete, shall we? And try and see two things if we can. One, what is it that is Eliot's vision of modernity, for lack of a better phrase, we'll call it that. His vision of modernity. What is wrong with modern human beings? And then secondly, what caused this problem in modern human beings? We'll look at both of these questions. We've already mentioned the two epigrams, both representative of individuals who are violent and yet men of action, Kurtz and Guy Fawkes. In foil to that, in opposition to that, you will have modern human. We are the Hollowmen. We are the stuffed men. I think I already pointed out to you, he doesn't use the pronoun I. I am the hollow man. I am the stuffed man, sounding kind of like a romantic John Keats. Or you are the hollow man. You are the stuffed man, sounding maybe like a Matthew Arnold. No, here we are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. In what ways can we be both hollow, empty, and stuffed, filled up? I don't understand this. Help me to understand this. How about it, Wilson? How can human beings be empty and yet stuffed at the same time?
They're full of pointless, worthless stuff.
Yeah, let's say it that way. They are full of pointless, worthless stuff. Let's go ahead and say it out loud. To say that you're empty and full at the same time is what we will call oxymoron. It doesn't fit together, right? It doesn't fit together. And to that degree, it is a paradox. We will engage in a number of paradoxes in this opening part. The primary modern condition for T.S. Eliot is a paradox where, dude, we are so unbelievably smart and we know absolutely nothing. We are so unbelievably full of all of our... He writes this poem before Google. I mean, what does it say that right now you can sit down and write almost any word and Google is going to tell you? I mean, I was just mentioning this whole, turnitin.com thing, which now can find absolutely every word ever written and posted to the net and then compare it to yours. And it can do it in lightning speed. I mean, it can do it in a matter of minutes. We know tremendous amounts, Eliot says, and yet something is profoundly missing, empty. Now, this is a harsh critique when it's we are the hollow men. In other words, you don't get to go, right, this is a great critique poem of modern culture, or in our case, postmodern culture. Lots of people I know need to read this. That's not Eliot. No. You don't get to stand outside of the human, modern, postmodern world and go, yeah, you people need to be more aware of the fact of how empty and stuffed you are at the same, This poem gets everybody, including Eliot. We are the hollow men. We're the stuffed men. We're like scarecrows standing in a field, right? Later he will call it cross staves in a field. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. And then there's this word, alas, which is kind of our word today. It's the word for our thought today of if you were to ask somebody, hey, dude, how's it going? And they were to just go, about that you would say what? Are they having a good day? No, it's not so much that they're having a crummy day, although obviously it's assumed that, but what else does that mean? One or two of you feel that way right about now, with just a few days remaining in your senior year. Like, how would you qualify that? Can you put it in words? How about it, Damiano? What would be the... She almost did it. She almost did it right there. She goes, right? I mean, it's funny. It's almost like we got to use the to try and answer what means. Really? What does it mean when somebody does that? Done. She even did her eyebrows like this. Done. What else? What else does it mean? Like done, but why done? What does it mean? Can carry with it the French word ennui, boredom. I have nothing to do. It can be depressing. It can be sad. It can be hopeless. All of that is assumed in the word alas, exclamation mark. Alas. Look what he says next. Our dried voices. Notice the adjectives. If you're going to be a great poet, you got to pay attention to your adjectives and your verbs. Our dried voices when we don't talk. Dude, I said this the other day to a bunch of sophomores, and first they fought with me, and then they went, crap. And I said, the last month, if we were to just simply hit the print key and print, let's call it in 10-point Times New Roman, so that way we can save paper. Every text you sent and received last month.
Oh my gosh.
And you just hit print. We would say two things about that list for most of us. One, that'd be a lot of paper. Even at 10-point times in Rome, that'd be a lot of paper. Even at front and back, that would be a lot of paper. But two, if we sat and read it, we literally forced ourselves to read it. The words we wrote and the words we received, and the words we wrote and the words we received, back and forth with all of the people we're texting. We would probably say about that, it's like completely empty language. Words, talking. Now we're sounding like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, huh? Talking. Words that are reduced down to a 4-letter word that is nothing more than Dante's fecal matter, right? That's what it is. All of this back and forth. Of course, we are, if we're sophomores, so you don't even contest this position because you're seniors and you go, yeah, you're probably right. Sophomores wanted to fight with me on this. Texting is vitally important to my everyday existence. That's the point he's making about what it means to your everyday existence. You don't have an existence. Scarecrows exist. You can see them. But they don't exist. They're filled with straw. When we whisper, what is it that we have to say? Well, there it is. Quiet and meaningless. And then Eliot, because he's a poet, he's going to play the game of simile. Remember, you always learned it as a freshman. A simile is a comparison using like or as, unlike a metaphor. Well, let's take a look at what real similes are, right? Take a look at the simile. He says, when we talk, we don't talk. We whisper. Oh yeah, when we text, it's all meaningless. It's useless language. Like what? What's a comparison that he can use? And this is why I love to teach in Wyoming and not somewhere else. I will tell my pals back east, and they will say, how do you do it? And I will say, well, believe it or not, there's things I can teach back east, back out west that you can't. Oh, really? Give me one example. And I'll say, well, like that first simile of TS Eliot's in the Hollowmen as wind and dry grass. Your kids have no idea, but I can say it to you easily. He says our talking, our whispering is like going out into the Badlands and sitting in the late afternoon when the wind blows through that sagebrush. You know that sound. All of you know that sound. That is our talking. Only it ain't talking, it's whispering. Completely meaningless. Blah, 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 blah. We're like unbelievably gifted at saying nothing. All of us. You've been so well educated to use so good words. Blah, 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 blah. Or look at the next one. The next one's even more disturbing. As wind and dry grass. Or, look at the next one. Rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Have you ever heard mice or rats scurrying? That sound? That's our speaking. That's our whispering. It means absolutely nothing. Welcome to the first stanza of a 5-part poem that will end with the lines, this is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. The way we go out, he will predict it in 1919. The way we go out is, and then as they say on that one t-shirt, last one out of Lubbock, turn out the lights. It's a town in West Texas. It's a hole. Oh yeah, I'm on tape. Now I'm going to be in trouble. I know though, okay. Yeah, that's it. The world goes away when the last living soul goes, and that's the end of it. We're not even going to have the courage to blow ourselves up with atomic weapons. We'll just simply go away. That's the first stanza of the first part. Now we'll enjoin a few paradoxes. Take a look at them. None of them work together, right? Shape without form. The artists in the house will say, yeah, that's not possible. Shade without color. Again, the artists will say, yeah, that's not possible. Paralyzed force, right? Gesture without motion. Make a gesture without making any motion. You will say, no. Eliot will say, oh yeah, you do it every day. You're doing it right now. You're here, but you're not here. You're somewhere else. Thinking. It's always about the past or the future. Go ahead, analyze it. All of your thinking. It's either about what happened a few seconds before or what's going to happen in the future at some point. Go ahead, try it. I dare you, Eliot says. It will embarrass you. You're never here. You are never here. Fascinating. Talk to any really gifted athlete. Watch those cats before they step into those blocks in the Olympics. Are you amazed at that? They'll show their face completely relaxed. They've been trained to be right there. They're not thinking about the finish line. They're thinking about right that moment. Why? They've been trained to do that. Most of us, not so much. So where do we live? Yeah, nowhere land. And then, maybe in the most disturbing observation that any poet will have made for you in the history of your brief biography, Eliot asked this disturbing question. If you could sit down with your great-great-great-grandma, you can't, but if you could, and you were to sit down with her, you don't even know who she is, most of you. Sit down with your great-great-great-grandma, and you were to say to her, but Grandma, you don't understand. It's like the hardest life I have to live. It's really terrible. I have all this stuff I've got to do, and all these pressures, and then there's this thing called the college I got to go to, and there's all this. Can you imagine for a moment in the middle of your rant, your great-great-great-grandma might look up at you and give you a look? Seriously? You're going to tell me about hard, your great-great-great-grandma. Really? You're going to tell me about how hard your life... And then she looks at you with those eyes. Just for a second, imagine it. Most of you might report, at that point when those eyes lock in your great-great-great-grandma, you might just look down. Oh. And she says, really? You are the product of what we did? We did all of that so you could do this? This is what you've produced. This, your generation. This is it. And you're going to tell me about hard? You'd probably go, can I just leave now? Okay, I'm going to walk away, and I really don't want you to look at me with those eyes anymore, because can you guess maybe your great-great-great-grandma's eyes would be defined as an adjective, direct. She'd look right into your eyes and go, really? You're going to call this thing you're doing called a life? Really? Okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm very interested in not looking. Take a look at the lines. Eliot, genius, the way he says it. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom. Some of you will say, dude, how did I read these lines and not get that? How did I not see that that's exactly what he was saying? He imagines it. The horror of all horrors. Your great-great-great-grandma is still around on the other side, and she's watching. And her eyes are direct. They are not hollow. They are not empty. She's watching you. The last thing you want to do is to go to the other side and to have to look her in the eyes. This is Eliot's answer to Hamlet's, here's why we don't kill ourselves. Here's why. The reason we don't kill ourselves is we're going to have to go to the other side and see our great-great-great-grandma, and she's just going to look right in our eyes and go, really? You call that 4 years of high school? Really? Oh, I don't want to have that conversation. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us if at all. Not as lost violent souls, we think of Guy Fawkes. We think, of course, of Kurtz. Not as lost violent souls, but only as the Hollowmen, the empty men. He continues with this notion of eyes. Eyes, he doesn't want to see it. And some of my seniors have said, ooh, now that you've said that, you know what? I think I'm going to try and live the rest of today in such a way that if I have to go, I'll be able to at least say to my great-great-great-grandma, well, okay, completely forget about everything except for the rest of the day that was this day. Because the truth of the matter is, I just don't want to talk about that anymore, okay? And stop looking at me with those eyes. Look, those eyes. Eyes I dare not meet in dreams, in death's dream kingdom. These do not appear. There, on the other side, the eyes are sunlight on a broken column. There's a tree swinging, and voices are in the wind singing, more distant, more solemn than a fading star. He doesn't want to go. Look at it. Let me be no nearer to death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises rat's coat, crowskin, cross staves in a field, behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer. No, that's okay. I'll just continue to be a scarecrow for the rest of my existence here. Anything so I don't have to die and go to the other side and see my great-great-grandma's eyes. I just don't want to see that. I'll wear a disguise. I'll pretend like I'm busy. I'll pretend like I have a life, just so I do not have to go and see my great-great-great-grandma. One senior once said, I hate this poem, but I think 15 days before I graduate, I need this poem. Not that final meeting in the Twilight Kingdom. Dude, if there's anything I can avoid, that's why we fear death. That's why we don't do anything. We don't want to go to the other side. 3. Oh, you'll know this one because you live in it, huh? This is the dead land. This is cactus land. The modern condition is nothing more than the Badlands. Every time you drive and see the Badlands, think, that's what T.S. Eliot says our lives are. Just like that. Notice, here, stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Is it like this in death's other kingdom? Waking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. Eliot had already said it by 1919. We're having way more sex than in the history of the world, but nobody's making love anymore. Everyone's having sex, but nobody's enjoying it. It's boring. And it doesn't really matter what you call it, whether you call it hooking up or sex or making love or whatever. We have more and more of it. We think about all the time. He said it's constantly pervasive in the culture, but nobody really cares anymore. It's kind of like boring. It's kind of like going to church and praying to broken stone. Nobody believes in it anymore. We are at the heart now of Eliot's assessment of the postmodern condition. It is, quite in a word, an understanding. No one believes in anything anymore. Nothing matters to anyone anymore. Your great-great-great-grandma believed in something beyond herself. We don't. We don't even when we say we do. We can't kiss because we have no capacity for emotion anymore. We are empty. As if this somehow is getting any happier, let's go to stanza 4. And of course it's Dantes Inferno. Do you remember? You die. You immediately are alive again. Only now you're completely naked, standing on that sandy plain, and you've got thousands and millions of people in front of you. They also are naked. And then immediately right behind you, got more people pushing on you. Of course, these are all the people that just died. This is Dante, remember? And of course, you got to go up to that river. You got to go across that river. There's all that howling and smelling coming from the other side over there. Remember, Dante said you can't see very well. T.S. Eliot said it reminds me of Manhattan or London. Have you been to the city where everyone walks with open eyes, but they might as well be zombies? Nobody looks anyone in the eyes on Fifth Avenue. It's the weirdest thing. They all have eyes open, but nobody, they literally can look right through you like you don't exist. Eliot would have said, I don't need a zombie movie. I can just walk the streets of London. It's the same thing. Dante had already played the game. The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here in this valley of dying stars, this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms, in this last of meeting places. Think Dante. We grope together and avoid speech, gathered on the beach of the tumid river. You didn't read the third part of Divine Comedy, but the multifoliate rose is the vision of Christ, the hope. Look at it, last line of that part. The hope only of empty men. Part 5. Here we go around the prickly pear of prickly pear. Prickly pear is, of course, the child's game, isn't it? Only it's not a mulberry bush, it's a prickly pear. And then a series of juxtapositions that we have to call hyperbole or paradox, oxymoronic. And then in the middle of all of these, the attempt to try to say the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom. But then the next line is not the continuation of the Lord's Prayer, it's life is very long. For thine is the... He once knew the Lord's Prayer, the speaker of our poem.